In my world there is music and good vibes and laughter and lovers, adventure and friendship. We know who we are.
Welcome to Be the Wellness Podcast, where we help you master your body, mind, and the experience of life through insightful conversation, interviews with experts and thought leaders, all with a side of marital banter and some good old-fashioned humor.
Yes, we are your hosts, Adam and Vanessa Lambert, and we're committed to helping you live life fully expressed physically, mentally, and experientially. Sit back, grab a cup of coffee, and join the conversation.
Welcome back, everybody, to Be the Wellness Podcast. Adam and Vanessa Lambert.
Here with another fantastic episode.
Bam. It's like we've been doing this for 211 episodes.
Almost.
No, this is 211.
Actually, exactly.
Yeah, right. Pretty much right at it.
So, how are you doing over there?
I'm good.
Yeah?
Yeah, it's Wednesday.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Got that figured out. We just recorded another awesome podcast.
Yep, which will be coming out in a few weeks. We've got a string of awesome podcasts coming out. And yeah, it just goes to show that, you know, your reviews, your subscriptions, all of that stuff out there just really makes a difference for us to book these guests and to get these awesome people and folks on this show. So we appreciate everyone out there who has subscribe to the podcast, left a 5-star review. And if you haven't done so, cue the drums, cue the band, cue whatever you need to cue.
Cue the lasers.
cue your podcast subscription page. But really just, want to thank everyone for doing that, stepping up to the plate. And if you haven't done so yet, now's the moment. We just so appreciate all the support, and it helps us to get these awesome, fantastic guests like we have on the podcast today.
Yes. And on the podcast today, we have Emily Hightower of the Intrinsic Way, which I recommend you follow her Instagram for all kinds of just, you guys are about to get a full dose of what she's about. And you'll be really excited about following her on Instagram because it's just more of the same.
Right.
And Emily is a somatic yoga and breath instructor, a biofeedback specialist, holistic health coach with over 20 years of experience. She focuses on trauma-informed self-regulation skills for healing and performance. And that sounds like kind of a mouthful. You're like, what does that even mean? But you'll fully understand it once we get through this podcast, and you'll have a real grasp of, how it is that she is helping people to tap into aspects of their, physiology, of their brain, of the patterning in the way that they represent themselves in the world, and using the breath and some pretty simple techniques for accessing that stuff and making a difference in how you respond to the world now.
Absolutely. Right? Yeah. And just, what really comes through for me in this podcast is just the kindness and compassion and just how really tapped in she is to the human condition and making a difference in that. And I just, this is a beautiful conversation. We just really enjoyed it and really connected deeply with her. And we think you guys will too. Yeah,
for sure. And, one of the things, so she does a lot of work with military, with special operations, with, with first responders and stuff, which is of course just a massive can of worms when it comes to helping people sort out these, the way that their body reacts to experiences that they've had. Right. And one of the things in my experience in dealing with post-traumatic stress debriefings and working with people to help you run through that stuff is that one of the critical elements is that the person who's facilitating it, that you feel like they're your peer somehow, and so a lot of times, the way we used to do it, it really was your peers, right? These are people who have had, additional training to help people through this kind of stuff. And in her case, she's kind of walked the walk, she spent a bunch of time, on a rural ambulance company, which it just it's a whole different world. If you're out in the middle of nowhere and a person on an ambulance, you are spending so much more time with the people that you are treating, and it's a whole other level of responsibility and experience that comes along with that, and you can tell that she knows what she's talking about, and she feels this stuff deeply. And I think that's part of the reason why she's so good at what she does. You know, for sure. She's completely relatable from that perspective,
Well said.
Which is great.
Yeah. Love it. So we hope you guys enjoy this podcast. Let's get to it.
And we are live. Welcome to the podcast, Emily.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this conversation, but there's a bunch of stuff that I kind of want to get through, but it would be awesome if you could just kind of, in your own words, give folks a little bit about your background and what has led you to this kind of interesting title of resilience coach, and like what that's all about.
Sure. My title as resilience coach is fun for me because it's kind of been curated through different trainings and life experiences that started with my own trauma. And so the background in my life is that I survived my dad's suicide when I was 15. That was kind of the first major life-shattering trauma. Although before that, when I was 9 years old, we went into some healing work around my mom's traumatic brain injury. So she had a pretty severe bike accident, and I was among the first on scene for that. So, the trauma stories that we all carry are so valid and interesting, but what that brought up in me was an insecurity during my formative years, and a sense that like anything can happen. Right? We are not on a secure path here in life. There are lots of uncertainties. And if, one parent could have a medical emergency and the other could have kind of a spiritual crisis, or what I now see as a physiology emergency, a stress management issue, then I should probably learn about these things. So in my 20s, I just was seeking the edge, and I went and became a whitewater kayak guide and river guide. And I studied mountain medicine. I was a wilderness EMT working on a mountain ambulance. And so those experiences gave me a chance to explore present time embodiment and risk, and like what it felt like to be at my personal edge. I found a lot of camaraderie and power through friends, and through just being engaged with nature at that level was profound. So from there, I shifted into preventative care about 20 years ago, and just became fascinated with how to heal what was apparent in my own system. Like I was doing these great things, and I was adventuresome and connected to people, but inside of me, I could tell that there were deep wounds. And I've seen the work you guys do. I'm sure this comes up in your adventure retreats where people are willing, they're so excited to get out there. But if we don't address the undercurrent of either limiting beliefs or encoded trauma patterns in our breath and our body, then, forget about things like nutrition. It's really hard to make behavioral changes if you don't address that underlying psychology and physiology. So
absolutely.
Yeah. It's so interesting to me because it's, we've kind of been doing this for a while, right? Between just normal nutrition coaching and strength and conditioning stuff, and then this transition into, sort of using adventure and this sort of kind of, putting yourself up against whatever your threshold is in the physical environment as like a lever to get into those things. And what I'm kind of hearing from you, I think, is that you've sort of unearthed the same kind of issues that everybody comes up against, right? Or like somebody comes to you or they would come to us because they think that they want nutrition training. And after a little while, we realize that there's some sort of deep, held belief about themselves that needs to be, rooted out or
yes.
Kind of ironed out one way or the other. And then maybe nutrition isn't even a problem, right? So we kind of always get around to this piece. And I think it would be awesome. Well, first, actually, before we kind of dive into some of the stuff, I want to square away a little bit of vernacular, because the way that we often talk about the quieting of the mind in meditation. We talk about the monkey mind being this thing that's sort of out of control and is what we're trying to kind of rein in a little bit through meditation. And I know that the way that you use the term monkey mind might be a little bit different. And so for when we get into talking about these various aspects of the mind, I just want maybe when we get to that, if that comes up in this next piece, let's just kind of differentiate the two. So our folks aren't like, wait, I thought we didn't want a monkey mind. Like,
yes,
what are we doing here?
Love to have that conversation because we're both right. They're both interchangeable. It just depends on the state of your monkey mind and how it's connected to the survival brain. So when it's time, you let me know and we'll just unleash that.
Well, why don't we just jump into it? Because I have a feeling that that's going to lead to a lot of interesting things. So let's just, let's talk about the different animal parts of the brain.
Awesome. So in the last 20 years of yoga training and physiology work, trauma resolution, I've had the opportunity to study with a neurologist and take lots of different training in how our brains operate when there's a real or perceived threat. And sometimes that perceived threat is coming from stimulus that invokes a trigger from a very old limiting belief or trauma. So perception, like some of the information stored in our brain is useful, some of it's not. And the way that the structures in their most simplified architecture work is you've got your lizard brain in the brainstem, which of course is keeping us alive. Very unconscious systems like your breath, your heart rate, your sweat, your pupil dilation. It doesn't care about your business or your friends or your family or your future dreams or how athletically fit you are. It literally is moment to moment reading stimulus from the senses and reacting on behalf of your survival. If it's hot, it seeks shade. If it's hungry, it eats. If it's horny, etc. Right. So the lizard brain does its thing. And then on top of that, we have the limbic system or the mouse brain in the model that I like to use from Dr. Daniel Siegel. And the mouse brain is where we subconsciously evaluate our environment and where we encode experiential information about what we learn about life in order to trigger things like fight or flight, rest and digest. So the mouse kind of informs the lizard brain based on its perceptions and emotional evaluation of circumstances. A great example of the mouse brain is look both ways before you cross the street. You know, you learn that traffic is dangerous, hopefully not experientially, but you hear that enough times and it carves a tunnel in the mouse brain so that now you don't even have to say that to yourself, obviously. You just go to traffic and you instinctively, subconsciously respond in appropriate ways to keep you safe. The monkey mind was introduced to me first through the yoga training in that similar way of like, gotta calm the monkey mind. Well, what does that mean? So calming the monkey mind means we're bringing the cortex systems of our higher functioning brain in connection and in concert with these survival structures and emotional subconscious structures of the lizard and the mouse. So when our lid, like the roof of your mind, when your lid is quote unquote down, that means you have a whole integrated brain with the best available resources from the monkey mind. Like the monkey mind at its best is what makes us human. It gives us access to compassion, empathy, logic, reasoning. It's why we can create, a Tesla or beautiful music and enjoy a sunset the way that we do. We have, just to take it into the, Velvet Elvis here, we have got this powerful monkey mind. And when we're not regulating our stress response, the monkey mind flips off its wiring to the lower structures and it starts to spin like a monkey reaching from branch to branch, messing around, causing trouble. And we start to operate from our past patterning and our survival, instant pleasure pain tunnels in the limbic system. So the last thing here is that there is a secondary voluntary breath center in the brain. Unlike other species on the planet, we can choose to breathe voluntarily and actually coax the breath into awareness into different parts of our bodies. We can do things to create focus and energy with the breath or downregulate. And just by breathing on purpose, we are tapping into the prefrontal cortex, the third eye in the center of the forehead. And that process rewires the brain and brings the monkey into its proper functioning place where it's at its best.
You know, it's kind of interesting because I've never actually done this, so I want to try this out with you and see how this lands. Because something that's coming up for me as you're talking about this, as you're talking about the breath work, is I'm like, I almost want like a demonstration. And is that something that you could do live with us, that you could almost like do a little breath sequencing? Because I'm just picturing the listener out there thinking like, oh, what is this breath work? Or what is this, you know, what is this thing that can actually access these different parts of my brain? And is that something that you could like do a little mini session around?
Absolutely.
Yeah, let's
all day long. All day long. I love it.
Cool. All right. I'm glad that didn't fall flat, because I was like, I'm feeling like this is where it should go. And hopefully you're not like, I can't really do that.
Yeah, no, this is what I do. This is what I live for. So thank you.
Perfect.
Because we're auditory and we don't have any visual support, I'm going to ask you to just first and foremost connect to the way that you're organizing your body. So as a listener, just look at how you've fallen into shape and address imbalances from the inside out. So you're not creating a super yogic posture here. You're actually just gently grounding whatever's touching a surface because of gravity. Let your body be held by that surface. And then please put your right hand on your heart and your left hand on your belly or navel center. And without making the breath do anything special, just spend 3 or 4 moments observing the movement of the breath in your body. And then notice which hand is moving more than the other. Without any judgment, there's no right or wrong. There's only the truth of this moment. And then notice if the right hand is moving more, that indicates a shallower breath pattern. And if the left hand is moving more, that indicates that you're dropped down in your awareness, which is excellent and more optimizing for your whole brain. And so in its simplest form, gently start to coax the breath. If your hands are comfortable, leave them there for some instant feedback. And start to draw a smoother, deeper breath that doesn't feel forced. And ideally use the nose for the inhale to create some suction and pressure to actually fill the lower lobes of your lungs. And this will expand the upper chest as well. The entire torso ideally is opening on the inhale, moving outward radially like an umbrella. And then as you exhale, you might feel the navel come in and up. And for the last piece of this mini inquiry, I want to invite everybody to gently study the end of your exhales. And just notice if you can be there for the moment the inhale comes. Not forcing a pause and not forcing a start. And when that inhale arrives, allowing yourself to receive it more fully without any need to lift the neck muscles or clench the jaw. Just relax to allow the inhale. Good. And then on an exhale, release your hands if they're still up there, and just notice for a moment what you see when you open your eyes. Soften your gaze to take in the periphery and continue awareness with your breath. So that very mini practice right there, just notice if your state is maybe not even changed, but you're aware of it now. the state being the condition of your mind and body in this moment. Right? So that mini breath practice, all of us, if you followed any of that, you just ignited the prefrontal cortex in the third eye. And no matter what story you came to this podcast with, no matter who offended you earlier in the day or what you feel you failed at or could do better, whatever you're hard on yourself about, when you breathe on purpose, you rewire your brain regardless of the stories. And so now you're accessing a more resourced, calm approach to those very real issues in our lives.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you can feel it immediately.
Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned the third eye, because I really can feel it activated right there in the center of my forehead. Like it's almost like my gaze just softened and that whole area just kind of ignited. So like, I definitely relate to that.
Yeah.
Beautiful. And that's a practice all in itself that's thousands of years old. The yogis knew that if we could soften the two eyes that guide our movement during life and open the third eye, and this, it's not metaphysical necessarily, this is science. Relaxing the gaze, relaxing the third eye shifts your entire state.
One of the things that's coming up for me is I hosted an event this last weekend, which was a really peak experience. I had all these women over and we were doing, breath work and meditation and exercise and ceremony. And it was just a really amazing peak experience. But one of the things that comes up for me after a peak experience is almost like this dip or this sort of drop off energetically afterwards. And so I'm wondering, and just now, I think that was what was partially in my space when I was like, oh, this could be a great thing just to ground in and start moving the breath. And so I'm just curious if you can speak to that, like having peak experiences, because we all have these sort of ups and downs, and like how you work around integration and, moving any of those higher experiences, especially, obviously you come from an extreme sports background. So you understand that, those adrenaline rushes and those peak experiences, but then how do you ground those into your body so you're not on this emotional roller coaster?
Yes. Oh, I love that question. And
I'm glad, because I really want to know the answer.
Yeah. I just know everybody can relate to that. And there are a few different angles that are coming up for me. So I'm just going to start with the obvious one, which is our culture teaches to honor the peak. And we're all seeking those peak experiences, even if it's just like going and getting a workout in. Mm-hmm. But what our culture doesn't necessarily train, and we're starting to embody this more, is integration and downregulation as a part of the experience that's not only important, but is deeply enriching and valuable. So if you go and you push your body into the sympathetic fight or flight arousal state, and you do like a super intense workout and you're dripping with sweat, most people high five, grab water, start chatting, write their results on some paper or on the board, right? And then they're excited. It's fun. So we're talking about the next thing. Skipping that step of breathing your physiology into down regulation, participating with bringing the heart rate down, engaging with the skill of integration as a shared practice is such a gift because it stretches time. And we start just now, like we had a little bit of air silence, which is such a gift. I'm so grateful already for your presence and your ability to allow for that. Clearly, you're high-level facilitators. And just like you do in your retreats and workshops, you give everybody else that integration time, reflection time, saying goodbye, but building that into the actual events themselves so that people spend time together down regulating. It's profound. So there's that level. And then the other angle is on a personal note, recognizing that we are meant to go down. Like it's part of the human condition. The range of experiences that we're gifted with include depression, lethargy, feeling reflective and wondering, did I do enough? Did I fail? Where could I have improved? And we want to skip that part, but it's really vital. I have found, like, whether it's the low after a peak experience, or that sense of tug of like, oh, I want to make sure, insecurity, like, did everybody have the best experience possible? Like, sitting in that discomfort can then inform us about really good, whole-minded, brain down actions to follow up and take in feedback and learn about what we did well and what we could do differently. And if we skip that step to stay comfortable, then we don't actually widen our capabilities or our stress tolerance, right? So that's really the second piece, is we're kind of meant to go there. It's totally normal.
Yeah.
I love that.
That's really interesting, because I think so much of what we're, encouraged to do is to, look for the bright side and try to, when we're having a down moment, it's like, okay, well, if you've got this going on, just go out and get some exercise, get a little sunshine, you know what I mean? Smart, write in your gratitude journal, or, we're just like encouraged to try to lift ourselves out of these states. And clearly there's a possibility of being kind of stuck in a funk, and then, being able to affect change to get out of that is a skill in and of itself. But I think it's really interesting what you're saying about the valleys, so to speak, being these learning environments. And I'm curious about that. And I'm sure that this is just an incredibly individual thing, but is there, in your experience with this, is there a way that you talk to people about identifying when you've spent enough time in a valley, or like when it's time to take action to climb out the other side?
Yeah, that is super personal, isn't it? It's like, how do we know when we got what we needed there? Yeah. How do we know that we've gone past recovery and integration and into dysregulation? And that is a skill that involves reading and engaging with your state over time to really understand the difference between like permission to be down and in the valley, and starting to kind of fondle your stories when you're there. The difference for me is that when I start engaging in a moral failing exercise, I suck, I need to get off the couch, what's wrong with me? Any kind of like the self-talk that comes from the dysregulated, deactivated state is very codependent. It's please love me. What can I do differently to get better? Which is a really different state than integration and balance, recovery, and a sense of learning without attaching your ego to it. So that's a flipped monkey mind right there. The monkey mind can flip low into depression. And signs of that kind of dysregulated flipping are what I just described. You'll live at the bottom of the breath. I'm speaking to it in physiology because there's a science to this. And it takes time to really get to, it's exciting, isn't it? Like, you can know your body so well and practice over time speaking to the actual need instead of the fondling of the story around your sense of moral failing or judgment, I don't know if that answered it for you, but
but I want to kind of peel into like one layer deeper with it, because what you're talking about with this fondling of the story and kind of playing on this edge of, and if I'm hearing you correctly, it's like playing on the edge of that was a beneficial lesson to now sort of wallowing in your own misery.
Totally.
Right. So I'm wondering how. I guess it is just, it's probably just realistically takes practice. You know what I mean? Of recognizing, but a first piece of this has to just be recognizing that there's kind of a cliff there, right? And you can be right on that edge and get the benefit from it. But as soon as you start to step into that moment, and I know, like, for myself, for example, and maybe this will help kind of bring some of this up, like, I tend to be pretty hard on myself, and I tend to ruminate on past mistakes. And when I was still with the fire department, this was something that happened routinely, because you're consistently presented with challenges that you could have done better. It's like one way of looking at it, And so there was this point that I would get to where you get into something and you go through it, and in the moment, everything is top of mind and you're just trying to get it done. But as soon as everything slows down, there's this constant reiteration of, I could have made this decision. I should have pulled this trigger sooner. I should have done this. I could have done this. And, for me with it, there was like maybe 2 passes through the loop that felt beneficial. And then after that, I really started to just feel bad about myself, like that was there was really like a noticeable difference that like, hey, okay, here, this is like an after action report where we're discussing what could have gone better internally. And now we just are in this mode of, you don't deserve this position. You probably promoted too soon. All of this kind of like negative self-talk, right?
Hate that loop. I know it well.
It's the worst. Yeah.
It's the worst one.
It's the worst.
Yeah.
And you can look, and if you look on either side of it, you can find all sorts of, evidence to support it, right?
Exactly, because we create from state, right? So the longer we dwell in a state, now we're starting to create our reality from that perspective. And it's, yeah. So I love your insight on like, okay, I get 2 passes through. I get my after action review. We process it, and that feels productive, right? We used to do debriefs on the river. And if we had incidents on the ambulance, like those debriefs are so healthy. And in a department that really produces that environment, those people excel. What's missing in the EMS service, where I come in sometimes to do training with fire crews, and this speaks to that exact issue, is seeing recovery skills as an active duty part of the job. So after that second loop, if you start noticing that shift into a hook where the monkey mind is flipped and it's grabbing at different branches, kind of indulging in the ride. And now you're starting to see the consequence of like, your food will be, for me, is like a huge indication of dysregulation. If I'm looking to comfort or numb through TV, through sex, through food, through whatever we choose to do as monkeys, then we can start to notice that our behavior is no longer in adapting and recovering. We're starting to slide into fondling the story and the state. And that's where I call it active recovery because of our culture. We don't ingrain culture with like the ability, most of us, it's taken my husband and I a long time to get to the place where I can say, I'm going to practice yoga nidra for 20 minutes. And what that means to our family is I'm going into my practice space and it's completely protected, just like his workout is. He's going to go do his 30 or 40 minute workout, then he's going to cold plunge in sauna. That's great. I'm not going to come to him during that time with needs and issues unless they're super urgent. But it's culturally not embedded, in my experience, for us to claim recovery of the nervous system. And so when you're talking about high performance crews, like fire departments, what do you do with the engine after it's overworked in a call?
Yeah, you got to put it all back together. Yeah, maintenance.
Yeah.
It's science, right? First you read it, you read the gauges, you read the tire pressure, you clean everything, you restock things that were used, and it's protocol and it's science. And we know plenty, especially you guys as holistic healers, like we're speaking the same language. You know the basics of what the body needs. When we're that depleted, it's such an easy slide to go down, to just kind of indulge in sliding deeper down into the stuckness and stickiness of it all. And that's the time that, rather than just upregulate with breath, 2 things. 1, recover, yoga nidra, organize your sleep and your food, get back to basics. And then number 2 is upregulate gently. The sympathetic works really quickly. So people who are in a super deep funk want to do the extreme opposite once it's uncomfortable enough. They want to sign up for a diet or a marathon or, engage with some new book club group. That's great. But maybe what you need is to go drink the sun into your third eye for 10 minutes. Maybe what you need to do is just a gentle ladder breath where you pick the inhale up in stages to build more sympathetic tone, more arousal and awakening in the nervous system. Again, to get your lid down so that your whole brain starts to see beyond the ego. When your monkey mind's flipped, the ego starts to just get super activated.
It's almost like, if we're using this EMS example, it's like really, it's okay to between the calls, right? You have the peak experience or the call or like the really activated thing that gets everything, the juices flowing. It's okay to pull the engine back in, restock, go offline, not respond to the calls, like be in that, that reset stage. And really like, it's almost your responsibility to make sure that you're fully restocked before you go run another call, before you activate, before you go put yourself in a situation where you're creating life again. And that's what it feels like to me that you're saying is that like, take as long as you need for that. Just don't start running calls until you've fully restocked.
Right. And if it's really a triage situation where that engine needs to go back out, you do the bare minimum. You triage the most important things and send it out again. That's fine. But long term, you maintain your equipment and you maintain a sensibility about the basic needs of the body and mind and the being. We see the human body as this unlimited resource, and the ego gets attached to it, especially in EMS culture of like, you know what, can you handle it?
Yeah. I don't need no sleep. I don't even need to eat. I've got another rock star. I'm good to go.
Right. And it's like the incredible fallacy of that. I don't have the research in front of me, but for some of my trainings, I've brought in some profound sleep research around cognitive impairment. And you might as well be pulled over for drunk driving. If you have slept less than 6 hours, 4 nights in a row, you should not be driving a vehicle. You have impaired reflexes and your whole brain is not online to make decisions and to help the team in the best way. So my big vision is hopefully, and I know a lot of progressive, holistic minded doctors and therapists are with me on this, like, what if someday we could protocol human performance with recovery and the science of recovery embedded so that we change shift work structures to match the human body, not the ego?
Or accounting, like, cause that's the big one, right? It's like, wait a second, there's 24 hours in a day. It's a 24-hour shift. How do we do this if you're only going to be active for 13 of those? Like, it is pretty crazy, and I don't think that, if you've been in the business, you fully recognize exactly what you're saying, that we have these detailed protocols for maintaining equipment that has a service life of 5 years, and we have no protocols for maintaining the human body, which has an expected service life of 30 years in the job. And then, hopefully you live at least another 10 or 15 after you retire, or else it probably wasn't worth it,
Right.
And it's madness that we haven't really dialed this in. But the thing that I always tried to do when I was still with the department and tried to kind of instill in some of the wellness programs and stuff that we developed before I left was this, and I mean, we're kind of talking specifically about fire and EMS stuff here, but it really does translate to everyone else if you can just kind of, see past the veneer on it.
Absolutely.
But the thing that we tried to use as a tool for teaching this, this kind of wind down routine, right, was a performance driven pause in a workout, right? And I'm sure you're familiar with the PRI breathing techniques, right? The Postural Restoration Institute, right? So that was kind of the first exposure that I had to, a sort of deliberate breathing technique designed to downregulate the central nervous system that you could put in between phases of your workout, right? So if you were going to do if you were starting your training program with some kind of heavy lifting, and then you were going to transition into something that was cardiovascular, you want to be able to kind of hit the reset switch on the central nervous system so that you're not going into your low level cardio with a powerlifting mindset, right?
Yes, exactly.
And so we started to try to utilize these tools as like something that guys can see immediate benefit from in a workout, and then say, hey, you know what else works really good? When you're smoked after one call, you can do the exact same thing, and it's going to take, 8 or 10 breaths before you go on your next call, and everything is going to be a lot better,
Love it. Love it. Performance is the doorway with most of the work that I do with military, veterans, and EMS services, because you guys have an advantage. You guys actually know more about self-regulation than most of the population. You practice it all the time. So it really is about translating it into daily life and understanding that broader patterning, how to read and interact with the broader nervous system patterning over time. So you can identify cycles in your nervous system that are starting to bring you into biphasic states where you're anxious then depressed, or keyed up all the time, can't turn off, hypervigilant, nightmares, flashbacks, constant iterations of scenarios, or that deep funk of complicit, just submissive behavior where you give up. And those range of conditions are normal. So normalizing that for people in performance jobs is, I think, crucial. And I love that you guys use that protocol and had that same approach. It's really similar to what I do with veterans. I coach at the Warrior Games and have gotten to do that, kind of work with athletes who are also retired veterans. And through the lens of sport and play and real risk and performance, we engage with the exact same physiology of stress.
Right.
So it's awesome.
It's so awesome. And so I kind of want to layer one more piece of this idea around cycles, because I don't know if you're familiar with Kate Northrup on the podcast a while back, and she wrote a book called Do Less, which is about for females, looking at their menstrual cycles and kind of looking at how their energetic swings happen throughout the month and how to kind of line yourself up to be activated in the right sort of domain at certain times. And I'm wondering if you work with that at all or look at that at all, because one of the points that she makes is that men have a 24-hour cycle, meaning that they go through all the ranges of activation, de-stressing, kind of are naturally on that 24-hour cycle of energy, where women are more in a 28-day cycle. And so it can be very helpful to sort of take a look at what's happening for you energetically so you can line up the expectations you have of yourself for what you're creating. So I'm curious if you have any experience with that, or if you layer that in at all for women.
I love that line of thinking, and I need to pick up her book. It sounds really important. Sounds like a great contribution.
Yeah, it's really cool because I think, I just honestly brought it back out and started diving into it, because I think for women, we have this expectation of ourselves to just like turn on the switch at the beginning of the day and that we're going to be able to maintain that energy all day long. But for us, we actually maybe have weeks at a time that we're really, really activated and high energy. And then maybe a week or two at a time that we're not. So yeah, I'm just, it's something that really has come to my attention again deeply. And I'm like, we're not really paying attention to that as women, because we're all thrown into this 24-hour cycle, and just thinking that we should have to sort of activate on demand.
Amazing. Well, and men are thrown into it right alongside of us, right? And so
totally.
The way that I've approached that so far, and I'm looking forward to learning more from you and from her resource, the way that it's landed on me was with learning to give myself permission to even have a cycle, realizing that and it was another Northrup, Christine Northrup, who wrote Women's Bodies, Women's Wisdom.
Yeah.
I have a yoga mentor who's profound influence on my life, who came into my life when I was in the thick of my teens, developing through, the loss of my dad, and feeling really disconnected from my body and watching the culture around me go through their rites of teenage years and feeling super lost. And she kind of pulled me aside, gave me Women's Bodies, Women's Wisdom, and gave me that permission slip to say, if you feel outraged the day before your cycle, that's not because you're about to go, quote unquote, on the rag and you have the so-called curse. This is your deep wisdom coming up at this time to tell you that there's something in the last cycle that you haven't resolved or been paying attention to. And if you deny your body and yourself the chance to use those powerful days to listen to that, you're going to repeat the cycle. And then I started kind of learning about that through yoga and through, certain contraindications for certain poses during your cycle. And that helped reinforce the notion that, this is a powerful, natural part of my physiology that impacts my condition, my state, my digestion, my mood. Excuse me, I got a little tickle. So it must be because I'm speaking about something important.
Exactly.
In my throat. So that was the first piece of really being given this insight and this permission through women's bodies, women's wisdom. And then ever since then, I'm 46. So, 32 years or so of just gently over those years paying attention to this pattern has made me really honor that all of us are subject to the moon, to the seasons, to the weather. And we've abstracted ourselves from that so much to create a world of widgets where you just are supposed to have what you want if you've earned it and can pay for it. And really, every single food and thing that we put in our bodies was tethered to the water cycle, the lunar cycle, the seasonal cycle. So men and women both were really interwoven into these natural patterns. And so for me, participating with my cycle has given me a chance to really do a reset during those days. I don't push my body during those days. And I'm really happy when it's tied with the new moon. That happens often. And that tells me that I'm really synced in, and that as the moon is building, my energy's building. I'm hopefully building towards ovulation, although soon I'll be in premenopause, not yet. But it's fascinating that our bodies create a whole moon, a whole egg with that cycle. And then if it's not fertilized, it gently sheds as the moon fades. So I'm always now conscious of where the moon is, what it's doing, and trying to kind of relate that to my body.
I love that. Yeah. It's funny because out of the two of us, Adam is the one who knows where I am in my cycle more than us or more than me. And that's just come into my awareness of how weird that is. And the reason he keeps track is so that he can go, oh, that's why she's acting a little weird. She must be getting ready to start her period. And it just occurred to me recently. I'm like, that is so crazy that here I am almost 42 years old. And I haven't even really looked at that as part of how I'm creating my life and how I'm, activating in projects or any of that. And it's just, again, big thanks to the Northrop duo of bringing that into my awareness, because we really have gotten disconnected from that natural energy flow. And so I love that you're doing that and honoring that. And it's actually just, I think, so important to keep bringing that up, because so many women almost just shove it away. And when it shows up, they're like, oh yeah, that's right, that's happening. But, it's such an intelligent part of who we are in the world. So I just
think
love
of that with sorry to interrupt you. You're inspiring me thinking about the valleys again, and that natural cycle of lows and the wisdom that can come from stopping. Just stop. There's this, if we're always looking for energy, well, we've got untapped reservoirs of energy available in stillness.
Amen, sister.
Yeah, that's the truth. Well, and this is something that I think, we all could use a little bit more of. And it's interesting, so kind of on the men's side of the house, when it comes to these sort of daily cycles of things, right? It's like the things that I've been able to identify, and for sure, our conversation with Kate Northrop really kind of cemented some of this, but I sort of found a rhythm with it. I just didn't really understand maybe why this was, but it was like the period of time during the day when I'm the most creative, when I'm the most productive, and then when I'm going to get the best workout. You know what I mean? And it really does follow. It's like, okay, testosterone levels are peaking at like 2:30 in the afternoon, and and all of this kind of stuff. It really makes sense. But I think one of the things that's been most valuable for me about paying attention just even to that little piece of it is that it's a kind of daily mechanism for just reminding me that I'm part of this whole thing. You know what I mean? And I could really see that being a massive benefit for women to tap into that cycle and to really truly feel and know that they are part of this massive thing that's happening on this planet. You know, you're just inextricably intertwined with the circadian rhythms of this world, you know? And what a cool way to separate yourself from the madness and you know, feel grounded and at home in this place, kind of regardless of where you are.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I love that notion. I think the idea that women need to always be on, or men for that matter, but in the context of women's bodies and cycles, what would we create if we were actually allowed to tap into that stillness, that wisdom, that reconnection time? You know, in our DNA, in our neurology, in our physiology, we are not different yet than how we were 10,000 years ago. We're evolving right now. So I don't know what we've changed. I can see in my son that he's like already programmed to use computers. They're pretty easy, but nonetheless, like there is a new blood type being identified that can actually be really flexible with different food inputs, different energy cycles. You know, so our bodies are evolving quickly as the planet evolves, and it's time to claim our values around this sucker, or we're just going to, you know, run loose into creating worlds as we already do that are not rooted in these deep primal cycles that actually nourish responsive, healthy decision making.
Yeah. And I think, you know, another thing is that we are, as a society, religion itself is kind of becoming less of a cornerstone of the everyday household. I think that I think there's a statistic now that more people are not religious than are in the country, which was like a pretty big milestone.
Shift.
And you know, and I think that regardless of what you think about that or what your religious beliefs are, what we have to acknowledge is that people are losing a connection to something greater than them in a lot of ways. And so this is something that you can say, well, I'm part of something bigger. And I think it's really important for our souls, for our energy, that we feel held, that we feel part of something bigger than just what we see right here in this moment. And so as we start to lose maybe those religious ties, I do think it's important that we replace it with some kind of other thing that we feel holds us in our spirit. And this, even just the acknowledgement of your cycle can be that.
It's huge. That's amazing. I love that insight. And you guys are awesome. So happy we're meeting each other.
I know, me too.
I love it. I love it. Well, and you're making me think of how food is that daily connection to nature that, you know, because we are so abstracted, we've convenienced ourselves into isolation even before COVID. We're designed in our DNA to be in small bands of people that are connected to a place, a food shed that we intimately know, and for our own survival, pay attention to what grows when, what threats are where. And so now that we've lost all that, what we haven't lost is the reality. We are still completely dependent on those natural systems for our survival, but we've abstracted so far that we can't even touch or feel it. But we can every day in our food. And, you know, that is in our nervous system, that enteric nervous system is the third branch of our central autonomic system that's so left out. Everyone talks about sympathetic fight or flight, parasympathetic rest, digest. But the digest part is its own entire brain, from the mouth all the way through the tube, through the stomach, intestines, and out the other side, is this one long, semi-permeable, intelligent nervous system. It's a brain. And it's there to communicate to the wings of fight or flight, deactivate, recover. It's there to communicate with those wings about what it's learning about the environment. You know, so if you shove a, synthetic chunk of something, food-like substance, as Michael Pollan calls it, into your face, that semi-permeable intestine, that incredible intelligent layer, is now decoding that, and it's sending signals to the body. This is not a safe time or place.
Mm-hmm.
And
wow.
Yeah, it's incredible, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I never thought of it from that perspective. I mean, we talk a lot about, oh, well, these are anti-nutrients and they're not doing good things. And now you've got systemic inflammation and blah, 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 blah. And it all seems very mechanistic, right? I mean, we can talk about the specific proteins that your body allows through the, the tight junctions in the gut and all of these kind of things. But the way that you just described that completely changes my perspective on it, because ultimately you're right. It is at the 30,000 foot level. That is a sense, that is sensing something about the environment that we're in, and your body's reacting to it. And that's, man, what an interesting way to think about that.
Right. And your body's thinking about that all the time. That's why when we used to fly on airplanes, our gut would shut down. Weird airplane food, airport meal, you eat something you're not used to eating, and the body, unfortunately, in some ways gets normalized to what we put in it.
Right.
But yeah, I'm so glad to be talking about food with you guys, because I know it's a huge part of what you offer with your program.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is something, it brings up something that Rob Wolf actually said a long time ago. And I don't know when this was. This was, I don't know, 20 years ago, probably now at this point. But he was saying something when he had gone and done just a short nutrition talk at Naval Special Warfare in San Diego, and was talking with some of those guys about how they're eating on deployment and all of this, and of course he's, Mr. Paleo, and was, bread and gluten and all of these things are the worst possible things in the world. And everybody needs to be eating more fish oil, right? Because we just do. And one of the things I talked to him after he gave his talk, and one of the things he was saying, he's like, well, I actually was recommending that these guys not eat a ton of fish oil before going on deployment, and that they actually include some gluten in their diet, because the last thing you want is for their blood to be too thin to coagulate, and for them to have some sort of adverse reaction if they get a gluten dose overseas. And I was like, shit, man, you are 100% right about this. Like, there is this so situation dependent, and our bodies can become so sensitive to, how we kind of deal in the world. And so it's always about finding that balance of like, what is going to make me be able to function at the highest level possible without, completely eschewing these sort of like long-term health benefits that we might be worried about with some of these anti-nutrients and everything, but what's going to keep me safe in the near term. And so it's something that I want to kind of talk about just a little bit, because the stress response world, I mean, my whole understanding of this is, I read Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, Robert Sapolsky's book a while back, and was just like mind blown, in the way that he talks about stress, mostly related to baboons. But of course that, we're not too far off of that tree, so to speak. And, and so one of the things that he talked about that I correlated really tightly with the fire department is that, these sort of beta baboons are the guys that suffer heart disease, and they're the worst off. It's the worst life in the world to be a beta baboon, was his take on it. And kind of the reason is that you're expected to go along with everything else that the troop has going on, but you're living in this sort of constant fear of attack, one way or the other, of getting bullied and beat up on. So that something bad is going to happen, but you don't really have a lot of control over what can be done about it, and you don't know when that's going to transpire, right? And he was expressing that being kind of the ultimate terrible scenario for stress for a primate. And I kind of equated that to working for the fire department, right? You're on duty, so something's going to happen. You're going to be expected to perform, but you don't know exactly what it is, and you don't know when it's going to come. And depending on who your supervisor is, you may or may not have much say in how the whole thing goes down. And I was like, yeah, that's the worst possible scenario to be in.
Incredible. That's why heart disease is the number one killer of fire crews, followed only by suicide.
Yeah. And maybe, and cancer might be creeping in there, but I think that's so hard to say. So I'm curious about this thought about, what there is to be done about the body's natural desire to forego long-term consequences in order to handle short-term threat. And if there's something, an aspect of your resiliency coaching that kind of aims at that directly.
Well, that's a powerful question. We could talk for a long time about the baboons. That's, it's heartbreaking really, because as you're sharing that, I'm remembering reading that. And I'm also remembering thinking about the people that are suffering so much in our culture and the people that I work with and myself, right? We've all suffered that sense of being out of control of our destiny in a sense, and that primal need to fit in and belong and to not be isolated. That is the monkey mind's primal function, is connection. When its needs are met, it feels loved. When its needs are not met, it feels isolation, which means you're not going to survive. So in that context, we are all looking for love.
Yeah.
We're looking for connection. And that's why we're podcasting without even seeing each other, having this amazing connection, because we're wired this way. We're hungry for it. So if you are robbed of agency, the power to choose for yourself, and you're constantly under threat, now that makes me think of how many people live that way because of misinformation, right? We can perceive threats based on patterns of anxiety in the nervous system. If we're not taught how to breathe, to regulate the condition of our heart rate, our stress response overall, then we can let that train run and you start to perceive the world as totally out of control. So voluntary breath, I don't know if this is answering your question directly, but voluntary breath does 3 specific things. A research paper posted on our Instagram feed also through HHPF, Human Health and Performance Foundation. Fascinating research showed that voluntary breath creates 3 things: ownership over your body, location, geolocation, so you put yourself in your body on the planet and know situationally where you are. And the third one is agency. Gives you agency over your choices. Now, again, that's all because of the prefrontal cortex getting wired back to the survival structures. So if we could teach those baboons to breathe voluntarily and to harness ownership, location, and agency over their bodies, they might, form their own band, right?
Right.
Who knows? They become the leaders of the posse. But in each of our lives, we're going to be faced with those acute needs. And the way that I work with this is that you have a window of stress tolerance, and its capacity is wide or narrow based on your curated patterns in your nervous system. So if you're always meeting acute needs and never focusing on the 30,000 foot view, the long-term health consequences of your behavior, you are gradually narrowing your tolerance to stress of all kinds. You're losing agency. You're losing embodied, relaxed consciousness in favor of meeting short-term needs. So if you want to be super badass and capable of handling yourself in emergency situations, it's essential to have a very wide window of stress tolerance through engaging in those basics. Sleep, really clean, healthy, nutrient-rich foods. You guys know all of it, right? Exercise, connection to other humans and nature. And conversely, if we're not putting ourselves into action, if we're avoiding life and we're not acutely meeting needs, then we flood out and actually narrow our window of tolerance as well. So if you're not risking anything and putting yourself out there and you start to think, well, gosh, I just need to protect myself, then you also lose tolerance. So there's a river of flow in between those two states of like hypervigilance and meeting acute demands and flooding out and just protection and saving yourself. There's a river in between that of like really flowing in life. Yeah, you got, if your boat flips, you got to get it back up right.
Totally. Yeah. I love that. Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. So I kind of want to switch gears here because I feel like we could probably talk to you for 5 hours. And before we're up on like an hour and a half here, I want to talk about allergies because I was checking out your Instagram and you were talking about your own allergies and your experience with them. And I want to just kind of touch on sort of a broad overview of how you approach dealing with them. And also you talked a little bit about getting the inoculations, the shots to help with the allergy flare-up. So I just want to kind of dive into that topic as a whole.
Great. Well, yeah. So you can hear me clearing my throat today a lot. And I'm doing that because it's a high pollen count day. And I'm, using an approach to my allergies that's actually really similar to the philosophy I have on trauma healing. Mm-hmm. So let's say that you have severe allergies and you're hyper reactive to something in the environment. Well, there are these antihistamine pills that are amazing, right? We can take them. They suppress the histamine reaction and we feel better. But the problem is that antihistamine is robbing us of participation with the information that the body has about what we're reacting to. Mm-hmm. And so if, say, that you have a food sensitivity to something like gluten, and that's part of the puzzle of your histamine overreaction. Let's say you just pop the pill and you feel better in the short term, but you keep eating foods like the gluten that's causing systemic inflammation because that antihistamine isn't going to resolve the deep reaction in your body that's intolerant to that.
Right.
So now you've robbed your body of the chance to inform you of what's wrong. And you're going to continue the behavior that was contributing to the discomfort in the first place, exacerbating problems chronically over time, weakening both the body's natural functioning and your ability to read and interact with it. So my approach, and this is something I've struggled with my whole life, it comes from, mama didn't breastfeed me, but I love you, mama. But that's a big part of it, right? She came from a culture at the time where that was just not cool and formula was amazing and gave her a sense of liberty, again, liberty from the body. And so the approach that I'm using is to identify what my body's reacting to through allergy tests, where you go off all antihistamines for at least a week and you stay off any, typical offensive foods like gluten, dairy, sugar, stuff that creates inflammation. You make your body really sensitive and then you get scratches in your back that contain proteins of potential allergens. And so I tested for tons of foods, every grass, pollen, and weed that's local, dogs, mold, cats, all the stuff that they recommend. And then I learned. And now the approach is going to be for me to take antihistamines as a boat to shore, which is so important because there are people out there that need some intervention to get through trauma, reactivity. Mm-hmm. So if the medication is used to just suppress the trauma and never learn from it, then it's a disservice and can become dependent on it and dysregulated over time with lots of horrible side effects, right? Antihistamines have side effects. I don't want to be on these things.
Totally.
Right? So now I'm getting inoculated with shots that have their own risks too, but that's life. So the shots at least dose my body with the specific allergens. It's like a customized cocktail of discomfort that my body's going to take on little by little to dose me with the trigger so I can learn to not react to it.
And so I'm curious about the process when you're getting this, are you instantly activating into any kind of breath work or anything that can kind of, help that onboarding process to go a little smoother?
That's a great question. It's kind of innate now for me to use breath work whenever I'm in a new situation. And certainly anybody that's had blood drawn or has been given shots knows the importance of self-regulation in those moments. But I haven't thought about that. And I really appreciate that point. Like what I'm hearing you say is like, if I could self-regulate and employ breath during the onboarding process, would that change or enhance my outcomes with inoculation?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Because maybe, if this is obviously it's a trigger to your body. And when it's introduced, if you're sort of overriding your central nervous system and calming it and saying, hey, we don't have to be as activated around this substance. I wonder if it would, create some symbiosis or, at least help that onboarding process a little bit.
Love that insight. It certainly works with trauma. I mean, that is the exact point.
Yeah.
Yeah. And whenever we're reactive to something, if we stay reactive, it gets worse. So I'm going to use that.
I feel like this is your next program.
Not just inoculation, allergy inoculation.
Right?
Allergy,
you would have a really big audience. Like everybody.
Everybody. And we use that. We use the breath when you're triggered. Not during inoculation. That's a new thought for me. Thank you for that. But we use it, during those, for me, when my symptoms are at their worst. Mm-hmm. I'm so grateful for the breath. And there are a lot of people that are asthmatics that are told, relax, just take a deep breath. And you cannot when you're geared up in gear 5 panic. Mm-hmm. And so there are protocols in the physiology of breath and the skill of stress course that I teach that train you to use a gear system, which originated with Rob Wilson and Brian MacKenzie with the art of breath. Mm-hmm. They use the gears for performance breath. I use them for recovery from trauma or hyperactivation. And it is fascinating how it can resolve the sneezing, itchy craziness just with breath.
Yeah. Yeah.
It totally makes sense though. I mean, we know how powerful the mind is and how the breath just really can help change literally the source code of what's happening in your body.
Yeah, so it's a complete redirect.
Yeah. It makes so much sense to me that would be, it would be beneficial.
Yeah. Yeah. The breath is just absolutely fascinating because it's the one thing that if you take it away, it's sheer panic. There's like almost anybody you can take people, and some people are afraid of spiders, and some people don't like small spaces, and some people, don't like the water. But if you choke someone and they start to not be able to breathe, or if they're underwater long enough, then they start to not be able to breathe, or, any one of these things, it's just deeply rooted in us to freak out, Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that Brian MacKenzie's doing that's super cool is working on the CO2 tolerance and trying to kind of, trying to gain a little bit of access to that, right? To put some space between you and the panic moment of not feeling like you can breathe in the life force, And I just think that in all of this, in the trauma work that you're talking about, and the skill of stress is a fantastic course, and everybody should do that. And it's like, it's just one of these skills that you're like, how do we not learn this somewhere else? When we all have experienced, whether it is literally the fact that you can't breathe and you're going to panic, or you have road rage, or I don't know, your team didn't win the Super Bowl, like whatever. We all have these moments where we flip into a state of being that we wouldn't recognize ourselves in, mm-hmm. And you're like, you think of yourself as calm, cool, and collected until you can't breathe. And then you're a wild baboon, until you get it back. Right. And it's like, what if we could learn, and we know we can, like, what if we did learn how to create a space between us and that baboon that we could recognize,
So powerful. I'm so glad you took the Skill of Stress course. Thank you for signing up for that.
Yeah. Oh man, I came across you on Brian I don't know if it's his personal page or what. I don't know. Brian MacKenzie's been in our world like 100 years ago. He there was like a CrossFit endurance cert thing, right? That he came and taught. And so I don't know if it was PSE or what, where you came up in there, but I saw the intro video to it, and you started talking about this, the idea of the lid flipping and the pieces of the brain. And I was just like, oh my God, this is the most articulate and clear way that I've ever heard this explained. And so I thought the course did it. Yeah, it's fantastic. So yeah, kudos for your ability to talk about something that's weird. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm used to interpreting it for a lot of different audiences, and I'm grateful that those guys pulled me on board to give voice to the skills I just really, the intention is to scale it so it's really available for people, and for me to keep learning as a teacher what works. So I always crave feedback and welcome the growth that I'm getting from putting myself out there like that.
Yeah. That's it's awesome. I mean, it's needed stuff.
I just get from you, Emily, like really, I got this immediately, which is just how much you care. I totally get that energy from you, that this is really all activated from your heart. So thank you so much for your words of wisdom, your service, for this lovely conversation. Please tell folks where they can find you, where they can find the program, and all that wonderful stuff.
Oh, well, thank you. The feeling is so mutual. I can tell that you guys are on a purposeful path that's driven from values. And I'm so glad that we met each other. I'm just really excited about what you guys are doing in the world too.
Thank you.
So you guys can find me at a few different channels. PowerspeedEndurance.com is where we're offering the Skill of Stress online course. It's right there on the homepage. And you can also learn more about my work through my company, Intrinsic. And I'm at intrinsicway.com. And on Instagram, the handle is intrinsic, INTRINSIC_way. And I think that's the way to kind of find each other nowadays. It's really fun to see instantly on Instagram everybody's work. It's really beautiful.
It is.
Yeah, it's our own. Everybody gets their own magazine.
Yes. So true. and maybe a like video channel alongside of it. Depending on how you use it.
The world indeed.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being with us today, Emily. Honestly, I really started out this conversation just feeling like a little out of sorts, and I feel amazing now. So
that's so great.
Thank you for your presence and for the breath work. And I hope people will, if they didn't get a chance to follow along, go back and actually do it, because it's amazing how just the simple exercise of taking a moment to really tune into your breath can just change your whole reality.
Thank you both so much. It's such an honor to get to be with you guys.
And that's a wrap, folks.
We know you thought it was awesome.
Yeah. She's great.
She's awesome.
Yeah. And she has some cool stuff, as we talked about in the podcast. Her Skill of Stress course is fantastic. It's 100% worth doing. It's so succinct and well laid out, and it just works, and it's not some massive commitment of your time and energy, but it's totally worth doing.
And let's just face it, stress is literally, for most of us, it's the number one thing we're facing.
Yeah.
It's like we can find the reasons that we may be stressed, but when you really boil it all down, like this is what we're up against as a species is like massive amounts of stress, and, fill in the blank of what creates that for you. But like we're all sort of in this paradigm of learning how to deal with it. And so this is a great resource. Yeah,
it really is. And there's something that's interesting that goes on. So she's working with Brian MacKenzie and the guys at Power Speed Endurance, right? And they are using breath as a performance and recovery mechanism, right? Which is essentially using the breath to recover from stress, and it's, so there's two ways of looking at this thing, right? Stress, your body doesn't know the difference between, a physiological stressor like running in the heat or being late on your mortgage. The same process happens. Like what the body does in response to that process might be different, obviously profuse sweating and, wanting to seek shade or some of the things that might happen when you're running in the heat, and, wanting to stick your head in the sand and cry in your pillow is something that might happen, when your mortgage is late, right? But the stress response is the same thing that drives that. And so it's fascinating to me that we have these kind of converging worlds of using the breath ultimately, to deal with these stressors, whether they're self-imposed for the betterment of your physiology or, imposed by the world around you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well said. And, I just want to wrap up this podcast before we depart and just give a heartfelt thank you to all of the people who have reached out over the last weeks and days since our beloved little Penelope passed.
Yeah.
it's been such a gift to us to receive the massive outpouring of love. And we just want to make sure that you guys know how much that means to us. Yeah. It's been just a devastating process. Yeah. And I won't start crying again. Well, I will start crying again probably for a long time to come. But we just want to, thank every single one of you who reached out or shared any bit of love and light with us. It really, really made a difference.
It does. Yes, it continues to, does, and it's so fantastic to see how many people were her friends. Yeah. It's like so many people are like, oh my God, I remember her from the gym, or oh, I remember her from here. And this is a long time ago that this was all occurring, Yeah. Yeah. It just goes to show what a special little dog she was.
Yeah. So thanks everybody. I mean, we really just can't say it enough. It's all about community. And when one is hurting, the whole is hurting. Yeah. So we just really felt so held in all of your loving embraces. And it's just been such a beautiful experience to be held in this time of grieving for us. So thank you so much.
Thank you all.
And we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Love you. Bye.